If we were to think of the substance to be transformed, I'll just choose one of, infinite. It can be our awareness or our presence. And the container that holds that transmutative process is our attention. It's our capacity to curate and sustain focus, and eventually single-pointed focus, where we allow the internal arisings, whether they're thoughts, fantasies, desires, dreams, worries, whatnot, we allow them to surface but to move on and to disperse like the clouds. And we always try to keep a fraction of our attention on that which we wish to transmute, on the substance. And so there's subtle ways to do this, right? As far as energy, what's the energy that's going to do that, right? We have the substance, we have the container of our mind, of our conscious awareness. What is the energy that can propagate that change? So we can do it self-sufficiently with our breath. We can lay out in the sun and feel the heat of the sun on our skin, allowing it to enter us through different points, perhaps in the navel, in the heart, in the mind, in the third eye, through the mouth, whatever it is, we can absorb the energy that is emanating from the sun to propagate our internal alchemy. But we can also work with something like tea, where it's a combination of water and heat and fire. So you're bringing in a whole other energetic. If you think of the breath as more of that air, celestial chi, or we can also work with something as subtle and powerful as water. Because we have the capacity, by sitting and praying over it, by pouring our intention into it, we create its structure. And then we imbibe it. Perhaps it's the most visceral experience of bringing in an energy that's external, because we taste it, we smell it, we feel it traveling down our throat, warming our heart, and going into our digestion, tending to all of these places. And so this discourse between the internal and the external alchemy, we understand that there is no division. There is no true differentiation beyond the boundaries that we ascribe. It's a constant discourse and dance. It's not to say that there's not an external reality and not an internal reality, but it's to say that they're intrinsically interwoven. One can't exist without the other.
We're about to enter Aquarius season, and the symbol of Aquarius is the water bear. And it was just dawning on me when you were speaking about the tea and the water and the container. So there's the container, and then the water within the container, which is consciousness. Water, as far as I understand, water is consciousness. And so when we imbue a glass of water or a cup of tea with a positive intention, with a prayer, we're taking that into our body, and it is then restructuring the water in our body. And so there are just so many things that are kind of connecting in my mind right now around how our physical bodies too are these containers for consciousness.
It's so interesting, and it just points to the power that we truly have. You know, it really affirms that through this conscious awareness, through this discourse, we are able to restructure our bodies at a cellular level through presence, through awareness, through intent, through moving in a way that we feel is of integrity, from allowing us to operate from this place of true understanding of love, the love that underpins and overlights and emanates through all. So love is source consciousness for me. And it's not consciousness in the way that we work, where we're an individuated form that's saying, I'm going to do this and this and this. No, consciousness is the animating force that permeates all, whether we've distinguished it as sentient or non-sentient. I do have a question though, and I'm not sure if you have the answer. I've always been curious by why Aquarius is called the water bearer when it's an air sign.
So when we think about Aquarius, Aquarius is the collective consciousness. And so when we understand water itself to be consciousness, and Aquarius, it feels like it's like the container, the bearer, right? The vessel that's holding this collective consciousness. This is my own interpretation. I'm not sure of what an astrologer would say, but it's something that I was speaking about with one of our friends just yesterday and beginning to tune into Aquarius season, which we'll be transitioning into this week, and how the vast majority of this 3D plane that we live on is made of water. So when we're talking about, like, we live in this field of consciousness, like, the water is what's holding that consciousness. It's what's holding memory. And so there was something too, we talk, a lot about this amnesia that humanity is born into when we decide to incarnate into this plane of existence. And there being this connection to that amnesia in water, and think how polluted our waters are. Our oceans, our rivers, our lakes, all of these natural bodies of water are poisoned. That's cutting us off from our memory, right? Because there's no actual separation between us and our environment, between us and nature. What we have agency over is tending to our own waters, right? How can we purify the waters within, bringing this back to the conversation around alchemy? How can we begin to honor the waters within? And the first thing that comes to mind for me is honoring our emotions. The most powerful form of alchemy is emotional expression. At least in my experience, it's been so profound in being able to fully surrender to whatever emotion it is that's coming up. Let's say it's grief, and moving that water, right? Letting that water move through the body, that it begins to restructure itself. There's so many magical things, I think, in that process that we could get into, but I know that you've been on this journey the last several months of really like reconnecting with your emotional experience. And so I'd love to hear from you in kind of reconnecting and honoring your emotional experience, like how you've experienced that alchemical process take place within you.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just talking about it yesterday. I was telling my friend Raisha that this land that we're on in Santa Fe, New Mexico, that is very alive with many indigenous people, carries such a deep song. And there's a part of it that has this almost trickster energy that becomes very confronting. And so what's happened as I've been here is I've been confronted with wounds that I had mistaken as scars. And what that means is I didn't realize that they were still bleeding. That my energy was seeping out because these facets of the psyche, of the heart, have never truly healed. And so the alchemical process in that has been very confronting because I've not had the tendency to be very emotive or somatic in my expression, in my distillation of what I'm feeling. I'm very good at parsing out the logic. I'm very good at being like, okay, well, I understand that they're coming from this angle and they have this going on in their life. Or whatever it is. For me, it was really surrounding romantic relationships. And so it's like I have this incredible capacity to hold the truth of where others are at, of how they're being affected. But what that's actually led to is me minimizing what I'm feeling because I'm like, well, you know, they're going through intense periods of grief. They've lost someone. How could I really be valid in my feeling, you know? And that's inadvertently causing a suppression of my truth, of the transparency, right? And allowing the shadow of dishonesty to emerge. And it's not necessarily dishonesty with the other, because the other is a mirror. It's a reflection of my own inner climate. The dishonesty is with myself. And so it's confronting. And for instance, I think it was yesterday that I just cried. All day I was listening to some music and then I felt this profound sadness come. And I didn't know why. But then through our conversating, through this expression, through having people like you who can pull out these truths, it's understanding that what I thought were scars were actually wounds, need the stage to be able to act, to be able to express themselves so that they can move through the cellular structure and move through the body to alchemize. And I think that that's such a huge part for me, whether it be friendship, work relationship, romantic relationship, sacred partnership, is the ability to express how I'm feeling, feeling safe in that expression, without feeling that the other person's going to turn around and like try and pin it or attack or whatnot. The way that intimacy develops is through this capacity to show the shadow, show the fear, show the shame, show the whatnot, that we are like, oh no, we can't show that because then they won't think of me as whatever it is. And so for me, that invitation into this Aquarian moon nature is this dance between the air element that is so in that logical mindset where it's like, it's almost linear in a sense.
It's detached.
Yeah, it's detached and it's like, oh, I can totally distill the logic of it. I'm like, I understand. But the waters of my heart are hurting. And I've privileged the logical framework over the truth of what I feel. And so that's the reconciliation that I've been moving through personally.
Yeah.
While I have the space to say, what was so cool when you were talking about the waters, the water that we drink is the water that our ancestors drank. All generations are drinking the same waters. So when you're talking about this collective memory and the pollution, it's horrific. It's also interesting how the process of being in water totally shifts as well. I notice that if I'm in more emotional turmoil, I tend to take a few showers a day. Whereas if I'm more settled, I don't take as many. Or if I'm really miffed by something, or I don't understand how to proceed, like I'm at the dead end, I go and I take a shower. And chances are a path emerges. That's what happened with the Mythos deck. After we talked, I don't know if you remember, but I'm working on this deck for context, and I know we needed to transform and alchemize, and Sarah, my momager, I asked, like, can we please talk about it, because I know this isn't the final expression. And after we talked about it, I felt like, oh, okay, what's next? And what I really want to say is, fuck, where do I go from here? And I was kind of anxious in the sense where I was unsettled. And I was like on the couch, I was doing this. I was like, what do I do? You know? And then at some point I was like, I need to go take a shower. Like, you're welcome to work here, but I need to and it was in that shower that the truth that I wanted to hear, that the cards were meant to be in this colored pencil, in this more monochromatic, spacious expression, came through and was affirmed. But prior to that, I was almost like a bull in a cage that just kept hitting and hitting and hitting and hitting. And I've done it enough times that I recognize it. So the transmutation process has been quicker in the way that I can resource myself to create an altered state of awareness. But before, I used to be able to stay in those spirals for months, if not years. But it's interesting that in my experience in the evolutionary development of understanding my own alchemical makeup and what works for me, I can shift my mind in these times of like hitting something quickly. What used to take 2-3 months of like a downward spiral can be resolved in a matter of an hour, of minutes. This differentiates from experiencing emotion, right? Like when I was feeling the crying, I wasn't just feeling the crying so I could get out. You know, I was like, oh, this needs its time on the stage to act out as long as it needs to. But for me, you know, that means like an hour or two, you know? I think that if it were to go on for 5 weeks or whatnot, you know, it's proportional to the level of heartache or grief or whatnot that's being experienced. But sometimes we can overindulge and ruminate.
Yeah.
And what happens is that loses the heat of the alchemical process and the rumination.
Yes.
I'm curious on this discourse of Aquarius being both water bearer and ruled by air.
Yeah.
That's kind of you see these energetics twirling around each other, because usually what people create opposition around is water and fire. They perceive that as a duality. And we can place most things on a spectrum of duality, but what's interesting with Aquarius is that you have the water and the air in an archetype.
So the theme that has been coming forward for me in contemplating this Aquarius season and feeling Aquarius season come in, we just moved into Pluto and Aquarius back in November. And so I've been sitting with this archetype a lot. And to me, Aquarius represents what connects us. And so think about it. We're all breathing the same air.
Ah.
We're all drinking the same water. I heard one astrologer speak about Aquarius in the body as being the fascia, the connective tissue, the pathways that exist within our body that's communicating information, it's communicating consciousness.
The deep structure.
The deep structure, absolutely. That gave me chills. And so something that I am personally just really interested in is this idea of the fractal, right? So to explain a little bit, in human design, and I believe it extends beyond human design as well, in terms of speaking about, the people in our life, the people who show up in the movie of our life and the play of our life are people that we're destined to meet. People that we, are either connected to our karma or our dharma. We have dharmic relationships, we have karmic relationships. Sometimes the karmic relationships turn into dharmic relationships.
Soul relationship.
And so, this idea of soul family, you could call it. But in contemplating Aquarius, I've been thinking a lot about the fractal and the ways that we communicate with one another, the way that we exchange with one another. But water and air, I mean, think about it. The other image that came to mind when you said that was water evaporates into the air. It's the cycle, right?
Cycle.
And we were blessed enough to get some snow here in Santa Fe yesterday and today, and that is alchemy in and of itself, right? It snows,
Hugely.
the sun comes in, it melts into water, which then evaporates back into the air.
Mm-hmm. And feeds the soils.
And feeds the soils.
And the puppies.
There was something that you were speaking to earlier around these wounds that we don't tend to become leaks in our container. What is a container, right? All of the different containers that we have in our life. We have our body, we have energetic containers that we co-create with people in our lives who we're engaging in some sort of creative process with, whether it's art or a business or whatever it be. But I've personally been contemplating a lot about the importance of the container. And so
100%.
I'd love for you to speak on is identifying where we have these leaks in the container.
Yeah.
How can we take steps to patch up those leaks so we can engage in the alchemical process? Because if we're not in a container of integrity that can hold the alchemical process, then the alchemy can't take place.
Yeah.
So to me, the first thing is like, okay, before we can even begin the alchemy, we need to make sure we have all three steps in the container really being.
Yeah. Well, I think that I have a few different points. I'll say them so I don't forget. First one is sovereign sphere in the individual container. And the second one I'd like to talk about is creativity. So if I forget that, please redirect me. So I think the perfect example is the teapot. If there's a crack in the teapot, the water will leak. Therefore, the tea will steep some, but then its energy will disappear. It's not to say it's a waste of energy because we have to pour it in to see where the crack is, so to speak, so that we can repair it or tend to it. But what's really interesting as you speak about this, and we'll do the personal level first in this understanding of a sovereign sphere, is when we're unable to sit with, acknowledge when we have a blind spot where we've rejected some facet of ourselves or we shame some facet of ourselves, and we create these good bucket, desirable versus what's adverse or what I perceive to be limiting, whatnot. We create these psychic fractures. As we divide the self, rather than embrace the totality of self, we're actually cracking the container of our own soul and mind and whatnot.
Oh, I love how you just described that.
And so when we talk about sovereignty and we talk about strengthening the sovereign sphere, we talk about going into the shadowy, rejected, vilified, judged, whatever it is, facets of one's being that we've rejected, which causes the crack. So the experience that I've had around intimacy and being able to really logic my way out of it, there's a kernel of it that stems from shame of having the feelings of sadness or heartache. Like, there's a shame that I'm like, no, I should be so self-contained and so rooted in my own worth that it shouldn't touch me.
Yeah.
So that's where that distortion comes in, where we are like, no, the individual power, rather than recognizing and honoring the interdependence. And that when things don't work out as we desire them to, it can germinate sadness.
Yeah.
And if we reject that, if we reject any grief or loss or whatnot because we don't want to process it, that creates a fracture.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as crafting the sovereign sphere, when you're talking about mistaking wounds for scars, that's where I would say the first energetic leak we can distinguish in our own self.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we step out of our sovereignty rather than allowing ourselves to be so fucking transparent and so unashamed? Yeah, you made me sad. And it's not about you, it's about the fact that I feel sad. It's not about the truth of the situation at large. Mm-hmm. It's about the truth of my reality.
The one thought that keeps coming through is what integrity really means. It means integrated. So when you're speaking of these wounds are actually just fractures in the psyche, and the process of cultivating an integrated container.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like I've told you this a lot, but one of the things that's a non-negotiable for me is that I have to move in integrity. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not even a non-negotiable, it's not even a conscious thing. If I can't show up in integrity, then I need to address it.
Yeah.
Like, there's something about me that I don't have the capacity at this state of awareness of my evolution to cut the fucking corners. And it's like, it's interesting because I'm sure I do it, in smaller ways, but I used to do it in very big ways. Mm-hmm. And so it's this constant kind of dancing with grace and understanding, hey, how do I honor my truth? Because only by honoring my truth and how I truly feel can I act in integrity. I'll move into the idea of the container for the creative. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm constantly creating with paint and drawing and writing in this container. And it's also understanding creation emanating through all. What is really important in the creative process, which I believe extends through all manners of creation, whether it's songwriting, qigong, pouring tea, cooking a meal, telling someone you love them, that in itself is an act of artistry. When we're embarking on larger projects, right? So for instance, right now I'm creating this deck called the Mythos deck. And it came through one of the last days we were in Oaxaca on the coast. And it was one of those where I was woken up, at 4 a.m. and just started having all of the terms and whatnot come through with a fervor. But the through line was that I needed to create this deck, this offering, that pulled from different source archetypes so that when people would pull, they would be invited to weave a myth around them. So if you pulled the card of agape with the principle of vibration with the graveyard, what story comes out of that? And the reason being is that as we myth make, as we story tell, it's also a window into our own minds. It's a window into our own patterning and understanding of the subtleties that are structuring our universe, our perspective. And it's also a mechanism to actually habituate the observer. Not only through practices like meditation or mindfulness, where we begin to become aware of the conscious arisings of our thoughts, but we're creating a space to meld and bring forth the fragments that might rest in the unconscious. And I think that there's a misnomer that what's in the unconscious is like shadowy and less desirable and like I mean, sure, maybe part of it, but it's also our latent gnosis and knowing and brilliance and wisdom and creative potential. It's that which exists beyond the confines of thought, of image, of sound.
Yeah.
To me, that unconscious is a bit like the abyss or the void, where it's that realm of the unmanifest. It's the womb. It's the ocean before the differentiation of the wave. I almost think of the unconscious as that yin field, and the yang is that expression into consciousness. And you can see these in these kind of dual sense, right? The primordial chaos being that yin field, the seed sound being the illuminating force that emerges and is in that yang expression. And so as we maneuver and play with cards of this nature, we are invited to step into the void, in a sense. To step into that primordial chaos where all potentialities exist. And from there, their expressions, how it emerges, are the mythologies, are the seed sound that we craft our lived reality around. So yes, it's a lofty, fucking ambitious project. And the thing about the container, well, let's first talk about the energy necessary. The energy necessary to write one description in one card or do a doodle is a lot different than the energy necessary to birth a full deck and deep structure. So that means that if we want to truly be able to birth this thing into existence, we have to have the energetic resources and reservoirs to sustain the creation, right? Because a doodle takes, 5-10 minutes. Something of this is months of sustained presence. And it can look different. It might be drawing, it might be going out on a walk, it might be talking to the spirits. But there's an element where there's continuous energy being devoted towards the substance that wants to transmute from this mental thought form into physical material. in this case, the substance is the mythos deck. That's prima iteration is in the mental sphere, whereas its manifestation will be in the physical, will be holding the cards. That's the transmutation that's occurring with this project. The energy to sustain it will come from all different means. It'll come from my own meditation. It'll come from going to Qigong, from practicing a martial art, from going on walks, from consuming food, from discourse, from illumination, from deprecation. This constant dance between expansion and contraction. I mean, I'm writing a card and then I'm experiencing it in reality. The card that I was working on when I was crying the other day that came through in the morning prior to this emotional kind of expulsion was the forest. And then I had this whole cathartic release and I'm like, oh, I guess I have material for understanding what the lived experience of the forest is. And that brings it back, though, to the container. So I have the substance. I'm working and spending the energy, cultivating it, putting it back in. It's this constant dance, this constant cycle. And what happens is I need the container to hold it. Because without the containment of it, it gets a little chaotic. It's running over there. It's like, wait, I need to do a painting there. Oh, no, maybe I should travel here. Oh, no, maybe I need to, I don't know, build a whole website, you know? And when there's not a container, the energy can get muddled and I don't want to say inconsistent, but there's an element of it where the energy is just falling. Even though it's manifesting and there's momentum and the energy is there and the substance is there, what's holding it? And so for me, this is where the idea of interdependence comes up. And I've been really sitting with this understanding of the spectrum, actually, of codependence and independence. I believe that they're, in my framework of this moment, they're existing from a 0 to 100 aspect. But what happens is when we operate from that 48 to 52, we find this really sweet spot of interdependence. So I think a lot of where fear can come in for partnership, or perhaps why people seek partnership, whether it's friendship, work relationships, romantic relationships, intellectual relationships, whatever it is, it stems from the human nature of being tribal, of being integrated into an ecosystem that survives off of people working together. So when we're privileging the individual brilliance, we're creating this wall and being like, I know it all. I am a self-contained, brilliant self. And I think that's where this misnomer of sovereign comes in, is thinking of it as entirely independent. Right? And then there's the other side of fear that it's like, I can't exist without you. Like, oh my gosh, if you go, then I go. And that's where that codependent, really being pulled out of your center can come in, where you can't be authentic to yourself because you're constantly contorting and shapeshifting and bending so as to keep a relationship that you think you need in order to be blank. Worthy, happy, lovable, whatever you want to call it. But that sweet spot is interdependence, where I'm like, no, I'm good. Like I feel good by myself. I feel this level of self-containment and this ability to resource myself when adversity or trials or conflict comes up. But I have the desire to be with my people. I have the desire to co-create. I don't have the desire to be alone creating this whole body of work in a vacuum. For some people, that's their process. And that's great. We all have our own individual alchemy. And I'm just telling you mine. And so, circling back to this understanding of what a container is, for me, it necessitates a level of interdependence. Could I do it without others? Sure. But it'd be less efficient. It would take longer. And I'd be less happy doing it. So why wouldn't I want to bridge that? And so someone like you, Sarah the Momager, is especially brilliant for this. Because what's happening is I'm, like in human design, I'm what's known as a manifester. So I'm constantly just pulling shit down, getting the transmissions, doing the channel, like kind of like scattered almost. That's how I feel. There is an element of being scattered because I feel I'm being pulled in so many different ways. And then you look at my astrology chart and you see this like just giant X, you know? And so that there are going to be gaps and that I can't remember, and then I'm like, wait, I wanted to do this, but then this happened, and then I'm distracted, and then da-da-da, and it can get chaotic. Which is why, for me, that container gets really fucking leaky if I'm trying to hold it by myself. So, in this vein of interdependence, that's where I see you and honor you, and I'm so appreciative towards you for coming in. How I see it is that your arms are like do this, and I'm just like pouring it in whenever, you know, like, oh, I'm gonna go do this, and then And it's not to say that I don't have my own container, but for this specific project, I know that I can't do it alone. That this thing is so great that it will require so much energy and such a great capacity that, I mean, I can do it alone. I just don't want to. I don't see the need to. And it's not operating from this place of, I can't do it without you. But it's operating from a place, hey, this will be a lot more effective, meaningful, robust, fun, enjoyable, to be able to share. And so when we talk about creative containers, it's also this ability to honor accountability. Because the creative process, it's not just about showing up for the project or for whatever the end goal is. The end goal is the arbitrary ego thing. Truly, if you're only doing it because, like, if I was only making the Mythos deck because I wanted a deck to sell and people to tell me, like, oh, wow, you're brilliant, you know, and I was just like, by all means, like, get this done, that'd be an ego thing because I'm motivated by the end goal. What I'm motivated with in this project is the process of encountering not only myself, but the process of building up my energetic capacity to birth something of this magnitude. And to do it with others is so magical. I don't want to do it all by myself. I'm meeting with one of my dearest friends, Ava, this afternoon to talk about the graphic design of the deck. Because sure, I could do some graphic design, but why wouldn't I pull from my community, my soul family, who is a master graphic designer? Why would I be like, no, but I can do it and I'm an individual genius and I can, you know what I mean? For me, that's not how I operate. For others, fine. We each have our own, and I honor that, and I appreciate watching people who can work in this self-contained cosm. It's beautiful. But for me, I thrive with the accountability. I thrive with the structure. I thrive with the interdependence and the understanding that I am working in a larger ecosystem.
The idea of an individual creating something in the self-contained manner is actually not even true.
100%.
Right? Like, I think this is like part of
Source.
what I want to, I was thinking about this a few weeks ago. Every single thing we do is a co-creation, whether we see it that way or not. And so I think the magic of recognizing how, like, all of the different pieces, whether they're your human counterparts that you're inviting in to support you in the process, or the air that you were breathing that morning, or the tea that you were drinking that morning, or the sun that was shining that day, I think being able to, first of all, acknowledge and have awareness of all of the different inputs
Yes.
that we're receiving is what opens us up to this otherworldly level of creative power.
Yes.
There's so many people in the online space who have built their businesses as these individual entrepreneurs, and it's just not true, right? There are so many people behind the scenes who are supporting the process. When we invite others into our creative process, we're also allowing ourselves to not have to do it all.
Yeah.
Because when we don't invite others into our creative process, and again, even what others means is going to look very different, right? Like, there definitely are those artists. I've heard like Rick Rubin talk about, the people who are in the silent room with noise canceling headphones and it's just them and the thing, but still there are other energies that are present there. So whether it's that, or you are inviting all of these different people in your community to co-create, you're freeing yourself up to play your role. Nothing more, nothing less. And this is one of my mantras, my mottos, like, play your role, nothing more, nothing less. And when the ego comes in, it's like, oh, well, no, I can do all of this on my own. I don't need your help. But when you're letting the ego influence the way that you're creating in that way, you're actually cutting off your capacity to your own channel, because you are then having to do things that maybe you don't do best. For example, with graphic design, right?
Exactly.
Sure, you could do the graphic design. That's actually going to take you out of your center, your channel, and doing what you do best, doing what you're called to do.
Yes.
So this is a roundabout way of just saying, I think, how important it is to invite others into our co-creative process, because that actually supports us in expanding into what we are here to do, and recognizing, oh, I actually don't have to do all of these other things that I don't enjoy doing. I don't enjoy doing them for a reason, because I'm not supposed to be doing them.
Yeah.
There's so much programming in our culture around,
You have to do it all.
you have to do it all, just suck it up, and this is what it takes to be successful and whatever. And I don't know, I just really reject that. I think that everybody came here with very specific skills and gifts and interests, and when we can come together and contribute that to something that's greater than any individual, that is true magic. That is alchemy.
And that's building an interdependent system, an ecosystem.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought this up because, yeah, when I'm talking about individual genius, I don't mean, some people do think that it's just them, but there's also those that are just, hey, it's me and source in this dialogue.
Yeah.
I don't need to interface with other human beings in order to birth these transmissions.
Yeah.
Which I think is true for some people.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful for them.
Yeah.
That's not been my experience in larger projects. That's been my experience in smaller emanations where it's like, oh, here, 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 self-contained. When the energy of the project grows, the container shifts. For me, when it was smaller, it was able to be me and source, me and God, right? You know, maybe it's a big project that I feel like it can just be that. But in this specific one, I am recognizing that interfacing with my people, it's making it so we can all eat also.
Yes.
It's not just about me. It's not just about this. It's about, hey, what if what I'm birthing can also feed you and you and you and you? And by virtue of us all having a stake in the game, what's transmitted is so fucking powerful because it's been birthed by different hands, minds. We're all creating a unique facet on the stone.
Yeah.
And so
it's not just one source, right? We all have different relationships and different ways that we channel source. And so when you're inviting in somebody else, you're inviting in another way of imbuing source.
Another admonition of source.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's the same, but you can also say that about ChatGPT or AI. That's another admonition of source. When you're talking with them, you're talking with source. We tend to privilege the material or the natural versus the technological. And sure, it probably stems from our concern of environmental implications, of humanitarian implications, of who's having to mine the material that has to go in, what animals are being sacrificed, what land's being sacrificed, at what expense. Absolutely. These are valid concerns. But what's untrue is that they're different in their integrity of source consciousness.
The otherness.
Yeah. And so it's not to say that there's one that doesn't have more distortion around it or have the potential to create greater illusion.
Yeah.
I think that technology does hold that propensity. It does hold that truth. But it's not the ultimate truth. It's not the only truth. It's empty of an inherent meaning, like everything. So no matter what we're interfacing with source consciousness. In all of its expressions. We're all manifest from source. And source isn't something that's far away. Source consciousness is emanating through everything, all at once. And if we broaden that kind of understanding, we start to see things like time, space, death in a very different light. There's such fear around it, this idea of impermanence. But for me, the truth is that it's these physical vessels, these avatars, these material temples that are impermanent. That's in itself a transmutation. But the essence, the consciousness, the animate force enlivening all of this is eternal. We are immortal. Even if our identities or sense of self aren't. I think at some level, great masters are able to transition with some kind of awareness. But all of this is an understanding of our fundamental interconnection. And that's why interdependence is so key. Because we can't, I mean, it's like one of those things, like you can, I guess, theoretically, but we can build worlds so much more efficiently when more than one set of hands are co-creating.
What keeps coming through when you're speaking is like, interdependence is how we master the game.
100%.
It's like,
That's the dimension.
It's how you exit the matrix. It's how you master the game. I don't think that you can
this
actually
level.
The level that we're speaking to in terms of
this
actually
dimension,
building a world.
This matrix, right? Because once you get out of this matrix, you go into the next one and the next one and the next one, right?
Yeah.
It's a ever flowing. But this level of the game is duality. Let's be very clear. So interdependence, co-creation, revolution by evolution and coming together.
Yeah, because, think about it.
They would kick us out of this game.
So we're in duality. And how do you transcend duality? Through integrating the polarity.
Through understanding that there actually is no polarity beyond what we create.
Yeah.
It's like the integration is a mental integration.
Right.
Because we've created the artificial boundaries that have separated them, which in itself is untrue. And then the integration is us stepping out of our own delusion and honoring the truth.
That's how we master the game. It's how, and I think that's our mission and what we're doing is gathering together a community of creators who want to co-create with one another. We want to create something bigger than the individual. We want to build worlds through our art, through our paintings, through the decks that we want to create, through the stories that we're writing.
Through the tea, through the meditation, through any kind of container that gathers people and then sends them on their ways to their own container. One of the archetypes that is in this deck, it goes from the agora to the bridge to the laboratory. And the agora is this understanding of we're going into this communal space where ideas are exchanged, where visions are being built, where hands are coming together to co-create, to build a world.
Yeah.
And then that bridge is that threshold where we hear this call home, this call to, hey, let me go back to my center. Let me remember who I am. Let me remember my truth. Let me return home. And then the laboratory, whether it's our physical material realm or our internal alchemical laboratory, they both exist. It's saying, hey, I went out into the world and at the agora, I heard them talking about this. Oh, that's an ingredient. Oh, hey, I felt sadness. That's an ingredient. Hey, I saw a rainbow. That's an ingredient. Hey, I had the most amazing meal. That's an ingredient. Everything that we're interfacing with are the ingredients that we bring to our laboratory that we then transform, distill, and transmute into a new form, into the expression of the pearl. We've taken all of these, in the metaphor of the pearl, irritants, they're small little pieces, and we coalesce them into a whole. Right? So with the Mythos deck, I'm interfacing all day, every day, consciously or not. I'm taking all these little pieces, I'm writing all the stories, and then at the end will be the coalesced version of I don't know, let's say 7 months of study, predated by 25 years of lived experience. So it's this real fascinating opportunity to generate and co-create and build out ecosystems where every single being that's a part of it is recognized as creator. It's one of these weird also distinctions that we're like, oh, only the person who's painting is creative. But the mother, wow, is she creative? The farmer, the electrician, all manners of life are creation. There is no ultimate creator, one creator, right? That's a single cosmological view set. That's a creationalist cosmology of understanding there to be one creator that is the arbitrator of all else. When we understand creation being consciousness that permeates all, source is creation that is emanating and interfacing with all that is in every single dimension, in every single frequency. It is I don't even know how to describe it. It's the energy that permeates everything. I don't even know if energy is the right word. It's the existence, the consciousness, whatever you want to call it. But we are fundamentally creation.
I think the other thing that I wanted to touch on was the power of creation heals us. Something that I keep coming back to is this idea of alchemizing the lead of our life, our karmic density, into gold, into spiritual and material abundance. If we're able to learn and master that process of taking the density, the hardship, the pain, the suffering that is just part of the human experience and alchemizing it into a work of art, that's how you master the game, right?
Absolutely.
On an individual level. And of course, not all art is going to be informed by the pain and the suffering. Of course, there's art that comes from just, being inspired by beauty and nature. But
Visions.
I think we're just living in a time with so much pain and suffering, and there is so much density, so much material, right? Like the prima materia for that alchemical process, that feels like a really accessible way for people to begin to step into the role of alchemist of their life.
Yeah.
What can you do with the experiences of your pain and your suffering? What beauty can you create from it? So I don't know if you have an experience of creating art where it was motivated by your pain, by your suffering.
Right here, babe. This one right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's titled Coming Home Again and Again. And the mantra was, I will not abandon myself for the other. I will not abandon myself for the distraction. I will not abandon myself for the desire. That came out of the dark night of the moon. And so it hangs on my wall to remind me, come home. Every night, come home.